Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, well, we're tackling something pretty fundamental. We're doing a deep dive into the very architecture of, well, your own thinking.
That's right. We've gathered a lot of work here detailing how we, as humans, form beliefs, make judgments, and maybe most importantly, why we mess up sometimes. Systematically.
Yes, systematically. That's the key part. We're talking about this core idea that your mind isn't just one thing. It operates using two quite different modes of thinking. We usually call them System 1 and System 2.
And we're going to break down how they work, how they interact, sometimes how they conflict, and crucially, the predictable mistakes, the biases they lead to. And all of this comes directly from the source material we've studied.
And look, here's the immediate practical point for you listening.
Yeah.
These mistakes, these biases, they're not random. They're predictable.
Uh-huh.
Once you get the language for it, terms like, say, the availability heuristic or the halo effect, it gives you a kind of defense mechanism.
Exactly. You start to recognize it.
Right. You go from just being swayed by, I don't know, a confident speaker to realizing, wait, that might be the halo effect talking. You can anticipate it, understand it, maybe even correct for it.
It's about building that awareness, that metacognition. Knowing about these things is kind of the first step for your more conscious thinking, System 2, to maybe double check what the faster System 1 is suggesting.
Okay, so let's really get into it. Let's unpack this machinery of belief and choice, starting right at the beginning with these two systems, System 1 and System 2. They sound a bit technical, maybe, but they're describing something happening inside your head constantly, influencing everything. So can you lay out the core differences?
All right, so System 1, think of this as your gut reaction. It's automatic, super fast, and happens without any real effort. No conscious control needed.
Like recognizing someone's angry face.
Exactly. Or driving on an empty road, or, finishing the phrase bread and right, effortless. It generates these immediate impressions, feelings, intuitions, intentions. The source material uses this nice metaphor. It operates at the pace of a comfortable walk. Always on, always processing.
Okay, so that's the fast one. What about System 2? That's the thinking, right?
That's the one. System 2 is where the effort comes in. It's slow, requires concentration, it's conscious. This is what you use for complex calculations like 17 times 24.
Okay, don't make me do that right now.
Right. Or following complex instructions, comparing options deliberately. It's your executive control. When System 1 is walking, System 2 is often just kind of idling in the background.
But it can ramp up.
Oh, yeah. It can go from that comfortable idle to, say, a jog, or even an all-out sprint when a task demands serious mental resources. And that sprint is costly.
So how do they actually work together? Because it doesn't feel like we're constantly debating every little impression we have.
No, exactly. Because System 1 is running all the time, it's constantly feeding suggestions to System 2. Impressions, intuitions, feelings.
Little nudges.
Little nudges, exactly. And most of the time, especially when things feel normal or easy, System 2 just accepts these suggestions without much fuss. It only really steps in, engages fully, when System 1 hits a snag or detects an error, or when the situation just requires more deliberate attention.
Let's talk about that effort, the System 2 sprint. The source material gets into how this isn't just a feeling like, oh, I'm thinking hard. It's physically measurable.
Yeah.
They mention pupil dilation.
Yeah, this is fascinating stuff. It really is like a window into the mental effort being exerted. So they do these experiments, give people a really demanding task, like the add 3 task.
What's that involve?
You hear a string of digits, say 4173. You have to hold them in memory, add 3 to each digit, and then say the new string aloud as quickly as possible. So 7, 4, 10, 6.
Yeah.
It's tough.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds hard.
And what happens, as you engage with that task, your pupils dilate immediately, and significantly up to 50% larger than their baseline area. It's a direct measure of the mental load.
50%. Wow. That's a lot.
It's huge.
Yeah.
And it's not just the eyes. Your heart rate jumps up too, maybe 7 beats per minute faster. Your breathing might get shallower. It's a real physiological stress response.
And there's a limit, right? You can't just keep adding load.
Absolutely. Push someone just a little harder on that add 3 task, ask them to go faster, or add another rule, and they often just give up, blink. The system hits its maximum capacity. There's just no more mental energy available.
And when System 2 is maxed out like that, when it's sprinting, what happens to everything else? The sources talk about cognitive blindness.
Yeah, this is critical. When System 2 is intensely focused on a demanding task, you become effectively blind to other things, even things happening right in front of you.
Like the invisible girl experiment, kinda.
Exactly analogous. In one study mentioned, people were doing an add one task, focusing hard on digits flashing on a screen. While they were staring right at the screen, the letter K would appear briefly.
They just didn't see it.
A surprising number completely missed it. All their available attention was consumed by the primary task. There was nothing left over to notice the unexpected letter. Mental effort creates a kind of tunnel vision.
Which makes total sense then, this idea of the law of least effort. If sprinting is that costly and makes you blind, you'd want to avoid it.
Absolutely. System 2 is, well, fundamentally lazy. Not in a bad way, just efficient. We instinctively avoid mental overload. We break down hard problems into easier steps. We write things down, use calculators.
We try to stay at that comfortable walk pace.
Exactly. We conserve that intense effort for when it's absolutely necessary. It's just how we're wired.
But this laziness, this reliance on the automatic system one, it sets up conflicts, right? Like the Stroop test, you see the word BLUE printed in red ink. System one screams BLE.
Right. It meets the word automatically. That's its job. But if the task is name the ink color, your System 2 has to actively fight that automatic response.
It has to say red.
It has to say red. And overcoming that initial automatic impulse from System 1 requires effort. It slows you down. You might make mistakes. It clearly shows that internal battle and the cost of exercising that top-down control.
And sometimes System 1's output is so strong, System 2 can't really override the feeling, even if it knows the facts.
Yeah.
The Miller-Lyer illusion is the classic example here.
Ah, yes, the lines with the fins pointing in or out. You can get out a ruler, measure them, and System 2 knows, absolutely knows, they're the same length.
But they don't look it.
They still don't look it. The one with the outward fins looks longer. System 1 is still generating that powerful visual illusion. You can't just decide to see them as equal.
So what do you do?
System 2 learns a rule. It learns to distrust its initial impression in this specific context. It says, okay, I know this looks wrong, but I also know it's an illusion, so I'll rely on the measurement, not my eyes. The feeling doesn't go away, but System 2 learns to override the behavior.
Okay, that brings us to something really interesting. Ego depletion. This idea that effort isn't just task-specific, it draws on some kind of shared, limited resource.
Exactly. This work, pioneered by Roy Baumeister and colleagues, suggests that all forms of voluntary effort, cognitive control, like ignoring distractions, emotional control, like suppressing laughter or tears, even physical stamina seem to tap into the same pool of mental energy.
How did they show that different types of effort drain the same battery, so to speak?
Well, in one famous study, they had people watch an upsetting film. One group was told to just watch normally. The other group was told to completely stifle any emotional reaction, show no feeling at all.
That takes effort.
A lot of emotional self-control, yes.
Yeah.
Afterwards, both groups did a test of physical stamina, holding a hand grip squeezed for as long as possible. The group that had suppressed their emotions gave up significantly sooner.
Wow. So controlling your feelings literally made their muscles give out faster.
It depleted their shared resource, leaving less available for physical endurance. Another classic one involved resisting temptation. People had to sit in a room with freshly baked cookies and tempting chocolates, but they were told they could only eat radishes.
Oh, the cruelty.
Right. Another group just got the radishes, no temptation. Then everyone was given a difficult, frustrating puzzle to solve. The ones who'd had to resist the cookies gave up on the puzzle much faster. Resisting temptation drained their self-control muscle.
And the sources make a point that this isn't quite the same as just being busy, right? Ego depletion is more about motivation.
That's a key distinction. When you're cognitively busy, like doing my add 3 task, your capacity is full. When you're ego depleted, it's more like you've lost the will to exert effort. You feel reluctant to try hard. You could probably perform if the incentive was high enough, but your default is to coast, to conserve what little energy is left.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and look under the hood of System 1. How does it actually work? The source calls it the associative machine.
Yeah, it works through this incredibly fast process of associative activation. An idea, a word, an image doesn't just sit there in isolation. As soon as it appears, it triggers a whole cascade of related ideas, memories, even physical responses.
Like the example if you see the words vomit, nausea.
Exactly. Just reading those words might make you subtly recoil, maybe feel a slight tightening in your stomach. Your mind instantly links them to related concepts: illness, bad food, dizziness. It all happens automatically, coherently. It shows how cognition is embodied. Thinking involves our physical selves, too.
And this rapid linking is what enables priming, where one idea can influence your subsequent thoughts and actions without you even realizing it.
Right. The John Barb experiment is the classic, almost spooky example. They had young participants unscramble sentences, and for one group, many of the words were subtly related to the concept of old age, things like Florida, bald, gray, wrinkle. Afterwards, they timed how long it took these young people to walk down a hallway compared to a control group who'd unscrambled neutral words. The ones primed with elderly words walked significantly slower.
Just from reading the words, they weren't told to think about old people.
Nope. The idea of elderly was activated in their associative machine, and that activation automatically spread to influence their physical behavior, their walking speed, completely outside of their conscious awareness. Actions and emotions can be primed.
System 1 is also described as being, well, gullible. Why is that important?
It's biased towards belief. When System 1 encounters a statement or an idea, its first instinct is to accept it as true, to make it coherent with other activated ideas. It automatically searches for confirming links.
So disbelief requires work.
Exactly. Doubt, critical thinking, checking for inconsistencies, that's System 2's job. And like we said, System 2 is lazy and easily depleted. So if System 2 is busy with something else or tired, we become much more likely to just believe whatever System 1 initially serves up.
Which explains why we might be more easily persuaded by, say, a slick advertisement when we're tired or distracted.
Precisely. System 1 processes the message, makes it feel coherent, and System 2 doesn't have the resources to push back and ask critical questions. Believing is easy. Doubting is hard work.
Okay, this leads perfectly into one of the most important concepts for understanding System 1's biases, WYSIAD. What you see is all there is.
WYSIAD. It's a bit of a mouthful, but the idea is crucial. System 1 doesn't care about the information it doesn't have. It takes whatever limited information is immediately available and constructs the most coherent, plausible story possible from that information alone.
So if I tell you Mindic is intelligent and strong,
Your System 1 immediately jumps to conclusions. Okay, intelligent, strong, probably good leader. It builds that coherent picture instantly. It doesn't automatically stop and ask, oh, wait, is she also cruel? Is she experienced? What else do I need to know?
it just uses what's there.
It uses what's there and treats it as if it's all there is. The quality or quantity of the information doesn't matter nearly as much as its coherence. If the story fits together nicely based on the available pieces, System 1 generates a feeling of confidence.
And that's a major source of overconfidence then. The feeling of certainty comes from the coherence of the story, not the completeness of the evidence.
Absolutely. WYSID explains why first impressions are so powerful, why we jump to conclusions. The source material mentions a legal scenario study, David Thornton arrested. Participants got some evidence pointing one way.
Even if they knew more evidence existed.
Even if they knew there was other evidence they hadn't seen, they tended to judge the case based only on the coherent story formed from the information they did have. They didn't sufficiently moderate their confidence based on the missing pieces. WYSID underlies a lot of biases: overconfidence, framing effects, neglecting base rates. It's System 1 running wild with limited data.
Okay, so System 1 uses these shortcuts, these heuristics, to be fast. But they come at a cost, these systematic errors we keep mentioning. Let's dive into some key heuristics, starting with representativeness.
Right. Representativeness is basically judging likelihood based on resemblance. How much does this person, object, or event match a stereotype or a category in my mind?
The classic example is Steve the librarian. Can you remind us of that one?
Sure. Participants are given a description of Steve. He's shy, withdrawn, invariably helpful, but with little interest in people or in the world of reality. A meek and tidy soul, he has a need for order and structure and a passion for detail. Then they're asked, is Steve more likely to be a librarian or a farmer?
And everyone says librarian, right? Because he sounds exactly like the stereotype.
Almost everyone, yes.
Yeah.
Because the description perfectly represents our stereotype of a librarian, but this ignores a crucial piece of statistical information: the base rate.
Yeah.
In the U.S. population, there are far, far more male farmers than male librarians. Maybe 20 times more, or even higher, depending on the year. So purely statistically, even a shy, tidy man is much more likely to be a farmer.
But System 1 doesn't care about the statistics. It sees the resemblance and jumps.
Exactly. The compelling story of resemblance overrides the cold, hard base rate information. System 1 is great at matching patterns, terrible at incorporating mere statistics.
This really highlights something you mentioned earlier, the mind's hunger for causal stories over statistical facts.
Oh, definitely. Our associative machine, System 1, is desperate for causes. It wants explanations. Think about the kidney cancer cluster example from the source.
Right, the observation that the counties with the lowest rates of kidney cancer are often rural, sparsely populated.
So your mind immediately jumps to causal stories. Oh, it must be the clean living, fresh air, less stress, organic food.
Makes sense. Coherent story.
But then you find out the counties with the highest rates of kidney cancer are also mostly rural and sparsely populated. Now, the causal story might flip to, oh, it's poverty, poor diet, lack of access to health care, maybe pesticide runoff.
So the causal story changes depending on the outcome you focus on. What's the real explanation?
The real explanation is purely statistical and much less satisfying to System 1. Extreme outcomes, both very high and very low rates, are simply much more likely to occur in small samples, like sparsely populated counties. It's a statistical artifact of sample size, not necessarily caused by anything specific about rural life itself.
But our minds hate that explanation. It feels empty.
It does. We crave a narrative, a cause. System 1 struggles with randomness and statistical properties. It wants a why.
And this same bias makes regression to the mean incredibly hard to grasp intuitively.
Notoriously difficult. When something extreme happens, say, an athlete has an amazing performance, way above their average, we notice it. If their next performance is closer to their average, which is statistically likely, our System 1 immediately searches for a cause for the decline.
They got complacent or the pressure got to them.
Exactly. We invent causal stories. We fail to appreciate that regression towards the average is just a statistical inevitability whenever there's an element of luck or randomness involved, whenever the correlation between two performances isn't perfect. Extremely good or bad luck tends not to strike twice in exactly the same way.
But we prefer the story of praise causing complacency or criticism leading to improvement.
We do. It makes for a better narrative, but it often misattributes cause and effect, ignoring the statistical reality of regression.
Okay, let's move to the next big one. The availability heuristic, judging things based on how easily examples come to mind.
Right. If instances of something are easy to retrieve from memory, System 1 assumes that thing must be frequent or probable. The easier the retrieval, the higher the perceived frequency.
The K-letter experiment illustrates this well.
Yeah. Ask people, are there more English words that start with the letter K or more words that have K as the third letter?
Well, it feels easier to think of words starting with K-kite, kangaroo, kitchen.
Exactly. Generating words starting with K is much easier for our memory search than scanning for words with K in the third position, like ask, bake, likely. Because retrieval is easier for starting letters, people consistently overestimate the frequency of words starting with K, L, N, R, V compared to them being the third letter.
Even though statistically K is more common in the third position.
In standard English text, yes. System 1 substitutes the difficult question, how frequent is K in this position, with the easier question, how easily can I recall examples?
And this availability shortcut can seriously distort our perception of risk, especially when the media gets involved, leading to an availability cascade.
This is a really important social dynamic. It starts when a relatively minor event, maybe a rare health scare or an unusual accident, gets significant media attention. This makes the event vivid and easily available in everyone's memory.
So people start talking about it more, worrying about it more.
Exactly. Public concern rises, which then prompts even more media coverage because it's now a hot topic. Politicians might feel pressure to do something. It becomes this self-reinforcing cycle. Media coverage, public worry, more media coverage, policy action, often driven more by the ease of recalling the vivid story than by the actual statistical risk.
And this leads to what the source calls probability neglect.
Yes. When an image or story is emotionally charged and easily available, think of a dramatic plane crash. People focus intensely on the terrible outcome, the numerator. They become relatively insensitive to the actual probability, the denominator, which might be incredibly small.
So we worry excessively about rare but vivid threats like shark attacks, while maybe underestimating more common but less dramatic risks.
Precisely. Our fear is driven more by the vividness and availability of the story than by a rational assessment of the odds. The availability heuristic, amplified by media cascades, can seriously skew our personal and public priorities.
Okay, heuristic number 3, anchoring. This is the tendency for our estimates to get stuck near a number we've considered beforehand, even if that number is totally irrelevant.
Anchoring is incredibly powerful and pervasive. The classic, almost comical demonstration involved a rigged wheel of fortune.
Like the game show wheel.
Yeah, but rigged to stop only on two numbers, 10 or 65. So researchers would spin this wheel in front of participants, it lands on 10 or 65, and then they immediately ask an unrelated question like, what percentage of African nations are members of the United Nations?
That wheel number is completely random, meaningless information for the question.
Totally irrelevant. Yet the people who saw the wheel land on 10 gave an average estimate of 25%. The people who saw it land on 65 gave an average estimate of 45%.
Wow. That's a huge difference just based on a random number spin.
It's a massive effect. The initial number, the anchor, dragged their final estimate along with it, even though consciously they knew it was irrelevant.
The sources suggest there are actually two different ways anchoring works, involving both systems.
That's right. There seem to be two main mechanisms. One is anchoring and adjustment, which is primarily a System 2 process. You start with the anchor number and then consciously adjust away from it based on other information. But the key finding is that this adjustment is almost always insufficient. We stop adjusting too soon, staying too close to the anchor.
Especially if System 2 is tired or distracted.
Exactly. Effortful adjustment gets short-circuited. The second mechanism is more automatic, a System 1 process, priming or suggestion. The anchor number automatically primes related thoughts and ideas. Your associative machine starts trying to build a world, a context, where that anchor number makes sense, subtly biasing your thinking towards values closer to the anchor.
And this isn't just something that affects students in lab experiments, right? Experts are susceptible too.
Oh, absolutely. They tested experienced real estate agents. They gave them the standard packet of info about a house, but included a manipulated listing price, either artificially high or low.
The asking price acted as the anchor.
Precisely. And it significantly influenced the agent's own professional appraisals of the property's value. They were anchored by the listing price almost as much as inexperienced students were.
Did they admit it influenced them?
Nope. They vehemently denied being influenced by the listing price, insisting they relied solely on objective factors. But the data clearly showed the anchor's powerful effect. It highlights how unaware we often are of these biases operating.
So the practical advice for negotiation. If someone throws out a crazy lowball offer,
Don't even engage with it directly. Don't start adjusting from it. The source material suggests making a scene, storming out, or just making it clear that number isn't even in the realm of discussion. You need to reject the anchor forcefully to prevent it from setting the terms of the negotiation in your own mind.
okay, we've seen how System 1 uses shortcuts for judgments. Now let's look at how these biases affect our ability to predict the future, starting with the illusion of understanding and hindsight bias. We look back at things and they seem so obvious, so inevitable.
Yeah, the narrative fallacy is incredibly strong here. When something succeeds, a company like Google, say we construct a story that makes that success seem like it was always going to happen. We focus on the smart moves, the great leadership.
And we forget the non-events.
Exactly. We ignore all the near misses, the lucky breaks, the competitors who almost won, the external factors that could have easily derailed the whole thing. Hindsight bias makes the past seem much tidier and more predictable than it actually was while it was unfolding. We create an illusion of flawless prescience.
This is the I knew it all along feeling.
That's the one, and it has really damaging consequences for how we evaluate decisions. Hindsight bias leads us to assess the quality of a decision based entirely on whether the outcome was good or bad.
Rather than whether the decision process itself was sound at the time.
Precisely. Think about a surgeon who undertakes a risky but necessary operation. If, due to bad luck or an unpredictable complication, the patient does poorly, people looking back, jurors, hospital review boards are very likely to think, well, that was obviously too risky, they should have known better. This is outcome bias.
Judging the decision by the result, even if the result involved chance.
Right. It makes it incredibly hard to learn from mistakes, and it unfairly punishes people for decisions that were reasonable at the time but just didn't pan out due to factors outside their control.
The sources mentioned this plays out big time in business analysis too. Evaluating CEOs, for instance.
Oh, definitely. When a company is doing great, the CEO is hailed as a visionary strategist. Their actions are seen as brilliant, methodical. If the same company later falters, maybe due to market shifts, suddenly those same traits are relabeled as rigidity, arrogance, failure to adapt.
It's the halo effect again, driven by the outcome.
Absolutely. Success casts a positive halo, making everything associated with it look good. Failure casts the negative one. Books that try to distill the secrets of success, like Built to Last, often end up comparing companies that were, to a large extent, simply more or less lucky during the period studied. They identify good practices that might just be correlated with luck, not necessarily causing the success. Luck plays a huge role, and hindsight bias makes us systematically underestimate it.
This underestimation of luck, this illusion of understanding, leads to a really challenging point in the source material. The idea that simple statistical formulas often outperform expert human judgment in predictions.
Yeah, this is a tough pill to swallow for many people, especially experts, but the evidence, going back decades to Paul Meal's work comparing clinical expert judgment versus statistical formulas, is pretty overwhelming.
And what kinds of predictions?
Across a huge range of domains: medical diagnoses, loan application success, academic performance, parole violations. Simple algorithms that just weigh a few key objective factors consistently do as well as or significantly better than human experts making intuitive judgments based on complex information.
Why? What's the advantage of the formula?
The key advantage is consistency. Formulas always give the same output for the same input. Humans, even experts, are, as the source puts it, incorrigibly inconsistent.
Even the same expert judging the same case twice.
Yes. The example given is radiologists evaluating the same X-ray on two separate occasions. They contradicted their own previous judgment about 20% of the time. If your judgment isn't even reliable, consistent with itself, it can't possibly be maximally valid or accurate.
So our attempts to be nuanced, to integrate subtle factors, actually introduce noise.
Often, yes. We get swayed by irrelevant details, our mood changes, we get tired, we try to be clever and deviate from a basic assessment. That just adds random error. The formula, being mechanical, avoids all that inconsistency. It might be simple, but it's reliably simple.
The APGAR test for newborns is presented as a prime example of a life-saving formula.
A brilliant example. Before Virginia Apgar developed her simple scoring system in the 1950s, assessing a newborn's health right after birth was based on subjective, often inconsistent clinical impressions.
What did your system do?
She identified 5 simple objective signs: heart rate, breathing effort, muscle tone, reflex response, and skin color. Each gets a score of 0, 1, or 2. Add them up for a total score out of 10.
Super simple.
Deceptively simple. But by forcing doctors to consistently evaluate these specific vital signs, it provided a reliable, standardized assessment of the baby's condition right at birth. It flags babies needing immediate intervention much more reliably than subjective judgment ever did, and it dramatically improved outcomes. It's a powerful testament to the value of simple, consistent rules in complex environments.
So given the inconsistency of human judgment, when can we actually trust expert intuition?
Yeah.
When is that System 1 gut feeling likely to be accurate?
Well, the source quotes Herbert Simon, a Nobel laureate, who said, "Intuition is nothing more and nothing less than recognition." Genuine expertise isn't magic. It's pattern recognition built up over vast experience.
Like a chess master instantly seeing a good move.
Exactly. Or an experienced firefighter knowing somehow that a building is about to collapse. They've seen similar patterns thousands of times before, and System 1 recognizes the cues instantly, even if they can't always articulate exactly why they feel that way.
So the source lays out 2 key conditions needed for trustworthy expert intuition.
Yes. First, the environment itself must be sufficiently regular and predictable. Chess is highly regular. Firefighting situations, while dangerous, also have underlying physical regularities. Second, the expert needs an opportunity to learn these regularities through prolonged practice, thousands of hours, typically with good feedback on their judgments.
What about fields where those conditions aren't met, like, say, stock picking?
That's where you get pseudo-experts. The stock market, especially short-term movements, is generally considered a low-validity environment. It's too noisy, too influenced by unpredictable global events. There aren't reliable patterns to learn in the way a chess master learns board positions.
So even if someone has decades of experience picking stocks, their intuition isn't necessarily reliable.
According to this framework, no. The environment doesn't provide the necessary regularities for true intuitive expertise to develop. The same applies to long-term political forecasting. The world is just too complex and unpredictable. Yet in these fields, experts often express very high confidence.
That's the illusion of validity. Confidence feels the same whether the intuition is grounded in a predictable environment or not.
Exactly. Subjective confidence is often a poor indicator of accuracy, especially in low-validity domains. You need to ask, is the environment regular? Has the expert had years of practice with feedback? If not, treat their confident intuition with skepticism.
Okay, let's talk about planning for the future. We're notoriously bad at it, falling prey to the planning fallacy. We consistently overestimate benefits and underestimate costs and time. Why?
We tend to adopt an inside view. We focus narrowly on our specific plan, our own abilities, the best case scenario for our project. We construct a plausible narrative where everything goes smoothly according to our intentions.
We ignore the potential roadblocks, the unexpected delays.
We discount them heavily. The source gives a great anecdote about a team designing a new curriculum. They were all experts, they had a detailed plan, and working from this inside view, they estimated it would take about 2 years to complete.
Sounds reasonable.
But then they consulted an outside expert, someone familiar with many similar projects. He asked a simple question. How long did it typically take other teams to develop similar curricula? This is taking the outside view, looking at the statistics of comparable cases.
Then the answer was,
The sobering answer was that the average time was closer to 7 years, and about 40% of such projects were never even completed. The team's inside view optimism was completely detached from the statistical reality revealed by the outside view.
so the antidote to the planning fallacy is to actively seek out that outside view. Use reference class forecasting.
That's the recommended remedy. Before getting lost in the details of your own plan, force yourself to identify a relevant reference class of similar past projects. Find out the actual distribution of outcomes for that class: average completion time, cost overruns, success failure rates. Use that statistical base rate to anchor your own forecast.
It seems like a way to combat our natural ingrained optimism.
It is, and that optimistic bias is pervasive. We tend to believe we're better than average drivers, our own risks are lower than others. This bias isn't always bad. It fuels entrepreneurship, encourages persistence in the face of setbacks. It might even be the engine of capitalism.
But it also leads to problems.
Oh, definitely. It leads individuals and organizations to take on excessive risks, underestimate challenges, and launch projects that are doomed from the start. Optimistic CEOs, for example, might overpay for acquisitions or take on too much debt.
So organizations need ways to counter this institutional optimism. The source mentions a specific technique called the premortem.
Yeah, developed by psychologist Gary Klein. It's a really clever, simple tool. Just before a final decision on a major plan is made, the team gathers.
And they imagine success.
No, the opposite. The leader says, okay, imagine it's a year from now. We implemented this plan and it was a complete disaster, a total failure. Now, take 5 minutes and write down why it failed.
So you're legitimizing dissent and critical thinking before the plan starts.
Exactly. It overcomes the pressures of groupthink and conformity that often suppress doubts. By imagining failure, people suddenly feel freer to voice potential risks and weaknesses that they might have kept quiet otherwise. It harnesses hindsight bias proactively to debug the plan before it's too late.
All right, let's shift now to the core of how we actually make choices, especially when risk and uncertainty are involved. We need to start by understanding why traditional economics, based on expected utility theory, kind of missed the mark.
Yeah.
This is Bernoulli's flaw.
Right. So Daniel Bernoulli, way back, proposed that people make decisions based on the subjective value or desirability of outcomes. But his key assumption, which became central to economics for centuries, was that utility depends on the final state of wealth.
Meaning, if I have $1 million versus $2 million, the utility is just tied to having that final amount.
Exactly. The theory assumes that what matters is your absolute level of wealth. If you and I both end up with $1.5 million, Bernoulli's theory says we should derive the same utility from that state.
But that doesn't feel right intuitively. What if I started with $1 million and gained $500K, and you started with $2 million and lost $500K? We wouldn't feel the same, would we?
Absolutely not. And that's the flaw. Bernoulli's model fails because people don't evaluate outcomes based on absolute levels of wealth. We evaluate them based on changes, gains, and losses relative to a reference point.
Usually our current situation.
Usually the status quo, yes. That $500 K feels very different if it's a gain versus if it's a loss. The utility of money or anything else isn't fixed. It depends entirely on where you started from. Your history matters.
Okay, so this realization that we think in terms of gains and losses from a reference point led to the development of prospect theory.
Yeah.
What are its key pillars?
Prospect theory, developed by Kahneman and Tversky, rests on 3 core psychological principles that really capture how we experience value. First, as we just discussed, is reference dependence. Outcomes are coded as gains or losses relative to that reference point.
Yeah.
Second is loss aversion. This is huge. The pain of a loss is psychologically much more powerful than the pleasure of an equivalent game. Losing $100 simply hurts more than winning $100 feels good.
How much more? Is
Well,
there a number?
the research suggests a loss aversion ratio is often around 1.5 to 2.5, meaning a loss feels roughly twice as impactful psychologically as a gain of the same size. This makes us inherently biased against taking risks where we might lose something we already have.
Okay, reference dependence, loss aversion. What's the third principle?
The third is diminishing sensitivity. This applies to both gains and losses. The subjective difference between gaining $10 and gaining $20 feels much bigger than the difference between gaining $910 and $920.
So the first $10 feels more impactful than the 100th $10.
Exactly. The same principle applies to losses. The difference between losing $10 and losing $20 feels worse than the difference between losing $910 and $920. Our sensitivity diminishes as we move further away from the reference point.
And if you graph this value function with gains and losses around the reference point,
You get that characteristic S-shaped curve. It's concave for gains reflecting risk aversion because each additional dollar gained adds less utility. And it's convex for losses reflecting risk-seeking because each additional dollar lost hurts less than the previous one, making you more willing to gamble to avoid the loss.
this loss aversion principle has massive implications. It explains the endowment effect, right? Why we overvalue things just because we own them.
Precisely. The classic mug experiment demonstrates this perfectly. They randomly gave half the participants a university coffee mug. These became the sellers. The other half didn't get a mug. They were the buyers, or sometimes a third group, choosers, who could take a mug or equivalent cash.
Yeah, and what happens when they try to trade?
The sellers, who now owned the mug, typically demanded about $7 to part with it. The buyers, who didn't own one, were only willing to pay around $3 for the exact same mug.
Why the big gap? It's the same mug.
Because for the sellers, giving up the mug is framed as a loss. And due to loss aversion, that loss looms psychologically larger, about twice as large, than the potential gain perceived by the buyers. Ownership itself endows the object with extra value, purely because losing it hurts.
So we're reluctant to give up what we have, even if we wouldn't have paid much for it in the first place.
Exactly. And this translates directly into a broader status quo bias. Loss aversion acts as a powerful conservative force, pushing us to stick with what we have.
How so?
When considering any change, switching jobs, adopting a new policy, even changing brands of coffee, the potential disadvantages or losses associated with the change tend to loom larger in our minds than the potential advantages or gains, even if objectively they're balanced. This makes us favor sticking with the current situation, the status quo, just to avoid the psychological pain of potential loss.
Okay, let's get into the fourfold pattern of choice. This seems to bring together several of these ideas to predict how we actually behave when faced with probabilistic choices.
It does. It's a really powerful summary of how our attitudes towards risk systematically change depending on two factors: whether the outcome is framed as a gain or a loss, and whether the probability involved is high or low.
Let's break it down. What happens with high probability outcomes?
Okay, consider a high probability gain, say a 95% chance to win $100. Here, people tend to be risk averse. We'd rather take a sure thing, like a guaranteed $90, than risk the small 5% chance of getting nothing. The fear of missing out on the almost certain gain dominates.
Makes sense. What about a high probability loss, like a 95% chance to lose $100?
Here, our behavior flips. We become risk-seeking. The prospect of a certain loss, like definitely losing $90, is so painful that we'd rather take the gamble than 95% chance of losing $100, but with that small 5% hope of losing nothing at all, we gamble to avoid the sure loss.
So fear makes us risk-averse for high probability gains, but hope makes us risk-seeking for high probability losses. What about low probabilities, rare events?
Okay, low probability game. Think lottery tickets. A tiny chance, say 1 in 10 million, to win a huge amount. Here, people become risk-seeking. We overweight that tiny probability because the possibility of the huge win is so attractive. We pay more for the ticket than its expected value warrants.
We're buying hope.
Essentially, yes. Now, flip it to a low probability loss. Think insurance. A small chance, say 1%, of a devastating event like your house burning down, losing, say, $300,000. Here, people become strongly risk-averse. We overweight that small probability of a catastrophic loss and are willing to pay a premium, the insurance cost, for the certainty of avoiding that potential disaster.
So fear dominates again for low probability losses.
Exactly. Fear of the large loss makes us overweight the small probability and seek protection. Hope for the large gain makes us overweight the small probability and seek the gamble.
The source material applies this pattern to legal settlements, showing a kind of power imbalance.
Yes, it's a fascinating consequence. Consider a plaintiff suing for damages. They face the prospect of a gain. If there's a high probability of winning a certain amount at trial, they fall into the top left cell. High probability gain, making them risk-averse. They're likely willing to accept a slightly smaller but certain settlement offer to avoid the small risk of getting nothing.
Okay, the plaintiff wants the sure thing. What about the defendant being sued?
The defendant faces the prospect of a loss. If there's a high probability they'll lose the case and have to pay damages, they fall into the bottom left cell. High probability loss. This makes them risk-seeking. The sure loss of settling is very unattractive, so they might prefer to take their chances in court, hoping for that small possibility of winning and paying a nothing.
So the plaintiff's risk aversion and the defendant's risk-seeking work against the plaintiff in negotiations.
It often gives the defendant a bargaining advantage, yes. The defendant is more willing to gamble, while the plaintiff is more inclined to take the sure, albeit slightly smaller, gain. This asymmetry stems directly from prospect theory's value function and the fourfold pattern.
Finally, within choices, we absolutely have to cover framing effects. How tiny changes in wording can completely flip our preferences, violating the basic idea of rational choice.
Framing effects are incredibly powerful demonstrations of how System 1 dominates. Rationality requires invariance. Your choice shouldn't depend on how the options are described, only on the actual outcomes. But framing shows this is routinely violated.
The Asian disease problem is the absolute classic here. Can you walk us through it?
Sure. Participants are told about an outbreak of a disease expected to kill 600 people. They're presented with two possible programs to combat it.
Okay. What are the options in the first frame?
In the survival frame, worded in terms of lives saved, Program A, 200 people will be saved, for sure. Program B, there's a 13 probability that 600 people will be saved and a 23 probability that no one will be saved. Program B. Here, most people choose Program A, the sure thing. They're risk-averse for gains, lives saved.
Okay, now the second frame. Same disease, same expected outcome, different words.
Exactly. In the mortality frame, worded in terms of lives lost, Program C, 400 people will die for sure. This is objectively identical to saving 200 out of 600. Program D. There's a 13 probability that nobody will die and a 23 probability that 600 people will die, identical to Program B. Program D. Now, faced with losses, people dying, most people switch their preference and choose Program D, the gamble. They become risk-seeking to avoid the sure loss.
So just changing save to die flips the majority preference, even though the outcomes are exactly the same?
Precisely. It's a stunning violation of invariance. The frame activates either the gain part or the loss part of the prospect theory value function, changing our attitude towards risk completely.
And this framing extends to how we mentally categorize money too, right? Mental accounting.
Yes. We don't treat all money as fungible, even though rationally we should. We put money into different mental accounts. Rent money, vacation fund, grocery budget, and how we frame a cost or loss relative to these accounts affects our decisions.
The example used is losing a theater ticket versus losing cash.
Right. Scenario 1. You bought a $10 ticket for a play. As you arrive at the theater, you realize you've lost the ticket. Would you buy another $10 ticket? Many people say no.
Why?
Because in their mental account for the play, the cost has now doubled to $20. That feels too expensive.
Okay, scenario 2.
Scenario 2. You were going to buy the $10 ticket at the door. As you arrive, you realize you've lost a $10 bill from your wallet. Would you still buy the $10 ticket? Most people say yes.
Even though the financial loss is identical, $10 is gone.
Yes. Because the lost cash is charged to a general revenue or miscellaneous loss mental account, it doesn't feel directly connected to the cost of the play itself. So buying the ticket still feels like it costs $10, which seems acceptable. It shows how these mental compartments, these frames, dictate our willingness to spend.
Okay, for our final section, we delve into perhaps the most profound distinction. The idea that within each of us, there are two different selves experiencing and evaluating our lives. The experiencing self versus the remembering self.
This is a really fascinating concept with deep implications. The experiencing self is the one that lives moment by moment. It's the self that feels pleasure, pain, boredom, joy, right now, and then now, and then now. It answers the question, does it hurt now?
And the remembering self.
The remembering self is the storyteller. It's the one that looks back, evaluates experiences after they're over, keeps score, constructs the narrative of our lives. It answers the question, how was it overall? And crucially, the remembering self is the one that makes decisions about the future.
And the sources show that the remembering self doesn't evaluate past experiences, especially painful ones, very accurately. It's subject to strong biases.
Two major biases dominate how the remembering self summarizes experiences: duration neglect and the peak end rule.
Let's unpack those using the colonoscopy experiment mentioned. Sound unpleasant, but illustrative.
Highly illustrative. In these studies, patients undergoing colonoscopies reported their pain levels moment by moment. That's the experiencing self. Afterwards, they gave an overall rating of how painful the procedure was. That's the remembering self.
And what predicted that overall rating?
Amazingly, the total duration of the procedure had almost no effect on the retrospective rating. That's duration neglect. A longer period of moderate pain wasn't necessarily remembered as worse than a shorter period.
So what did matter to the remembering self?
What mattered were two things: the level of pain at the most intense moment, the peak, and the level of pain right at the very end of the procedure. The remembering self forms its overall judgment based essentially on an average of the peak and the end, ignoring how long the whole thing lasted.
So if a painful procedure is, say, 10 minutes long, but ends really abruptly at peak pain, it might be remembered as worse than a 20-minute procedure that has the same peak, but then gradually tapers off to mild discomfort at the end.
Exactly, even though the second procedure involved more total pain experienced over time.
The cold hand study seemed to confirm this bizarre preference where people actually chose more pain for a better memory.
Yes, this was a direct test. People submerged one hand in painfully cold water for 60 seconds. Then they did it with the other hand for 90 seconds. The first 60 seconds were identical, but the last 30 seconds involved the water being slightly but noticeably less cold.
So the second trial was longer and involved more total time and pain, but it ended better.
Correct. Then they were asked which trial they'd prefer to repeat. A significant majority chose to repeat the longer 90-second trial.
Why?
Because the memory of the longer trial was less unpleasant, thanks to the less painful ending, the peak end rule. Their remembering self dictated the choice, effectively choosing to subject their experiencing self to 30 extra seconds of pain, just to have a better memory of the experience later.
That's kind of disturbing. The remembering self seems tyrannical.
It raises real questions about which self's well-being we should prioritize. The remembering self clearly dominates our choices and evaluations. It also explains the less is more effect. Sometimes adding a mildly unpleasant experience onto the end of a very unpleasant one can actually improve the overall memory.
This focus on peaks and ends, ignoring duration, also affects how we think about entire lives, doesn't it? The story of Jen's life.
Right. Participants read a story about Jen, who lived a happy, fulfilling life until age 60. Then one group read that Jen just died suddenly at 60. Another group read that Jen lived until 65, with the last 5 years being only pleasantly happy, not ecstatic like before, then died.
So the second version adds 5 merely pleasant years to a very happy life.
Yes. Rationally, the second life contains more total happiness. But when asked to rate the overall desirability of Jen's life, people rated the shorter life, dying at the peak of happiness, as better than the longer life that had a less glorious ending.
Duration neglect again. The remembering self cares more about the quality of the story's ending than the total quantity of good experience.
It seems so. Life is evaluated like a story, judged by its significant moments and its conclusion.
Okay, let's bring this down to practical measures of well-being. How does something like income affect the two selves differently?
This is a really important finding. Higher income seems to have significantly different impacts. When you ask people for life evaluation, overall, how satisfied are you with your life these days? On a scale, higher income correlates quite strongly with higher satisfaction. More money equals higher evaluation, seemingly without limit.
So richer people say they're more satisfied with their lives overall.
Yes, when they stop and think about it, when their remembering self assesses their status. But when you measure experienced well-being, how happy, sad, stressed, angry people feel moment to moment throughout their actual day, using methods like experience sampling, the picture changes.
How so?
Experienced well-being, those daily emotions, also improves with income, but only up to a certain point. The source material famously cited a threshold around $75,000 annual income in high-cost areas of the U.S. at the time of the study.
So above $75,000 at that time, more money didn't really make people happier day to day.
It had very little additional effect on their reported daily happiness, stress levels, or sadness. More money beyond that point continued to boost their overall life evaluation, but it didn't seem to buy more experienced happiness in the moment.
Why the disconnect?
Yeah.
Why does life evaluation keep going up when experienced well-being plateaus? This leads to the focusing illusion, doesn't it?
Exactly. The focusing illusion is summarized brilliantly in the source. Nothing in life is as important as you think it is when you are thinking about it.
Say that again?
Nothing in life is as important as you think it is when you are thinking about it. When you are asked that global life evaluation question, how satisfied are you? System 1 often substitutes an easier question, what's salient in my life right now? And if you happen to be thinking about your income or your marriage or your health, that factor suddenly looms incredibly large in your assessment.
You focus on it, and it seems all important.
Right. The classic study compared students in California and the Midwest. Everyone thought the Californians must be happier because of the wonderful climate. When you asked them to rate their own life satisfaction and rate how much climate mattered, the Californians rated climate as more important, and both groups predicted Californians would be happier.
But were the Californians actually happier overall?
When their overall life satisfaction was measured without first focusing them on climate, there was virtually no difference between the Californians and the Midwesterners. Thinking about climate makes climate seem crucial to happiness, the focusing illusion. But in the day-to-day reality of life, many other factors dominate experienced well-being. We exaggerate the importance of whatever we happen to be focusing on. #tag outro.
So we've covered a huge amount of ground here, really a deep dive into this dual process model of the mind. We've seen System 1, the hero, often fast, intuitive, coherent, but also the source of so many predictable biases, WIA Sayati, substituting hard questions with easy ones, neglecting statistics.
And we've seen System 2, our capacity for deliberate thought, for rationality, for overriding those biases, but it's often lazy, easily depleted, and too quick to just endorse System 1's flawed suggestions. There's this constant tension.
Understanding this tension, these mechanisms, these biases, what's the biggest takeaway? What's the most valuable thing you gain from knowing all this?
I think one of the most profound takeaways is simply being forced to confront the limits of your own knowledge and intuition. The illusion of understanding, hindsight bias, the illusion of validity, they all conspire to make us feel like we know more than we do, that the world is more predictable than it is.
So humility, maybe.
A good dose of intellectual humility, absolutely. And from that, maybe a greater willingness to question our own confident judgments, especially in complex situations.
So how do we actually make better choices, knowing all this internal machinery is whirring away, often leading us astray?
Well, there are no magic bullets, but the knowledge itself is a start. We need to learn to recognize the situations where biases are likely to bite, like when facing potential losses, or making judgments based on stereotypes, or planning complex projects. We should actively seek out mechanisms to counter them.
Like using checklists, seeking the outside view, employing techniques like a premortem.
Exactly. Trusting critics more, relying on data and algorithms where appropriate, even if it feels less satisfying than trusting our gut. And perhaps most importantly, trying to shift how we evaluate decisions, judging them by the process used to make them at the time, given the information available then, rather than solely by the outcome, which is always influenced by luck.
And finally, this deep dive leaves us with that fundamental conflict we discussed at the end, the two selves.
Yes. We have to grapple with which self's interests we want to prioritize. Do we make choices that maximize the moment-to-moment well-being of our experiencing self? Or do we make choices that create the best possible story, the most satisfying memories for our remembering self, even if it means sacrificing some present comfort or enduring unnecessary hardship?
Favoring the narrative versus favoring the lived experience is definitely a provocative thought to leave everyone with. Which life do you choose to optimize? Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.